This is the RPG Crawler, and welcome to another shelf of many things, where I take a look at indie and small press tabletop role-playing games and accessories. And it's time for me to look at yet another Retroclone, although this time it's because it's one that I've had on my to-get list for a while, and I finally broke down and ordered it. White Box Fantastic Medieval Adventure Game. I usually know it as White Box Adventures, although that's apparently not correct. It is from Charlie Mason at Seattle Hill Games, and is based off of the White Box version of the Swords and Wizardry system, which itself is based on the original 3 books of the White Box version of Dungeons & Dragons from the early to mid-70s, minus most of the additional material and supplements, although White Box Fantastic Medieval Adventure Game actually does include the optional Thief class. Now, I say this is based on Swords and Wizardry White Box, and it proudly proclaims itself as compatible with that system right down here. Boop, boop, boop. So it's like right up front. But you know, for once, those may be too loose terms for it, since this is basically a re-edited version of Swords and Wizardry White Box, plus the Thief class. There are a few technical differences between them in the absolute minutiae and in some tables that were not included in the Swords and Wizardry White Box version, but the differences are minor enough that I'm not going to sit here and enumerate them. Rather, I'll just take a look at White Box Fantasy Medieval Adventure Game on its own merits. However, before I start, I will say that I have played and run both, and I personally, just from my own experience, found that White Box Fantastic Medieval Adventure Game was a clearer read and easier to find particular rules in, although your mileage may vary. This is available as a 144-page paperback on Amazon, on Lulu as a print-on-demand hardback or paperback, and as a free PDF, as well as purchasable hardback and softcover print-on-demand through RPG Now. The version I'll be talking about here has a different cover art set, but from what I can tell, the interior contents are nearly identical. Interior art is relatively consistent in style between current versions, or so it seems, being mostly decent quality fantasy line art that evokes the old school style from the late 70s and early 80s without being, well, quite as goofy, honestly. Typography and table formatting is clear and easy to read, and honestly, the editing is some of the tightest that I've seen from a technical standpoint in terms of these OSR games, with presentation errors being vanishingly few. If you're going for the physical book, the softcover at least is compact. As you can see, I can pretty much fit it in my pocket, easy to carry and transport, and seems durable enough for print on demand. At least the version I got from Amazon is. I will say that the cover on mine is already showing signs of wear for me, but that may not be saying too much because I've honestly been using this book very heavily since I got it, more than I thought I would, for reasons that I'll get into after covering the contents. The book starts with an introduction that basically states the obvious, that the project started as a rewrite and re-edit of Swords and Wizardry White Box, and then onward to Chapter 1, which tells how to get started with the game. It's extremely brief, highlighting the basic rule of these older editions, that the rules are more a guideline than anything else, and the usual going on about explaining types of dice and so. Although interestingly enough, aside from a few spells and the various content tables, the vast majority of actual rolls in the gameplay itself are either a single d20 or various numbers of d6s. There are the standard 6 attributes of D&D derivative games, although this game uses a sort of unified attribute bonus scale, pretty much inherited from the Swords and Wizardry version, that only really gives a single point of bonus or penalty for exceptionally high or low skills, as well as offering minor experience bonuses for wisdom and charisma, in addition to the character's prime requisite. So you can have a potential total of plus 15% experience if you have high stats in both your prime requisite and in wisdom and charisma. All classes use d6s as hit dice, just different numbers of d6s, and the game itself uses the classic lawful, neutral, chaotic info for its default alignment system. Chapter 2 covers the classes, which include the basic 3 of Fighter, Magic User, and Cleric, but also the optional Thief class. They have only a very basic set of abilities, and use a single saving throw number as the default, as inherited from the Swords and Wizardry system. Each table includes the number of hit dice at each level, some of which may only grant +1 hit points rather than a full hit die. The next chapter covers the non-human races, dwarves, elves, and halflings, each of which has a very simplified, stripped-down version of special abilities available to that race, as well as a small selection of classes that they can be, most of which are capped at quite low levels. Chapter 4 is the equipment chapter, which, as usual for the really early edition derived games, only includes a few pages of equipment prices with some very basic descriptions. Like the swords and wizardry system that it is derived from, it includes both ascending and descending AC numbers, so any particular game master can decide which one to use. All weapons use just D6s, modified in a few cases with a single point up or down for damage, depending on whether they're a light weapon or a heavy or two-handed weapon. Chapter 5, although brief, covers all of the core rules necessary to actually play the game, such as movement, combat rules, and so forth. It's really where it differs from its source material. Although the rules are all very simple, in this particular instance they're well organized. There's no flipping back and forth through the book to find stray rules that might be tucked into other chapters, and they are rewritten in a more concise, easier to read format, which really helps in terms of accessing them quickly. The attack tables and other rules are compatible with Swords and Wizardry, and honestly compatible for the large part with the early editions of the original game. And here's where the heavy use of this book in the short time I've owned it came in, because I actually ended up referencing this particular system while playing a pre-existing Swords and Wizardry game, simply because it was easier to find things in this book. The next chapter covers the spell lists, which are simple and cover the basic classics, although the versions in this booklet are a bit more detailed than in the original editions. There is very simply a format that contains just a paragraph or two of text, the range, the duration, and the spell level. Cleric spells go up to level 5, while magic user spells go all the way up to level 6. Chapter 7 covers running the game itself, which is similar to Chapter 5, except that it includes things from the game master's point of view, as well as tips on designing adventures, awarding experience, as well as lots of charts for random dungeon and wilderness encounters that I think are actually different from the Swords and Wizardry one in that they include more options. Chapter 8 is the monster chapter, and uses the, by now standard, Swords and Wizardry format, just the monster's AC, hit dice, attacks, movement, XP value, and any special abilities they may have. Of note is that all hit dice are D6s, and unless damage is specifically listed, all attacks are considered to just simply do a D6 damage, which very much simplifies things across the board. A fair amount of monsters are provided, but as they are basically, as I said, pretty much the entire book is Swords and Wizardry compatible, one can import monsters directly from that game. The next chapter is treasure, and it uses the same system as the one that is based on, offering treasure equal to the experience value of creatures with some variation, and then a trade-out system to add gems and magic items in lieu of coins. I have to be honest here, I'm not sure I like that system. I'm not sure I like the system when I saw it in Swords and Wizardry, but it's workable for quick play, and it makes for a very swift creation of treasure hoards based on the monsters that you get them from. The rest of the book pretty much simply lists magic items, with a few charts of just the basics, and it's one of the portions of the book that I feel that could have gone into more detail or at least offered more items. Still, with how simple magic items are in early editions, it's easy enough to simply add more. So White Box Fantastic Medieval Adventure Game is clearly an OSR Retroclone, and the only thing that really keeps it from being a yet another Retroclone is that it is basically a cleaned up, slightly easier to understand, run and play version of Swords and Wizardry White Box. That doesn't necessarily set it out, it simply gives it some utility. Physically, it is compact if you go for the hard copy instead of the PDFs, and in that price range, it makes it easy enough to carry around for gaming on the go. A position which, for me, is currently occupied by only a few other gaming systems, some of which I've covered before. If your group can't stand the original D&D, this is probably not going to convert you, even though it is a little bit easier to play. If you're a fan of Swords and Wizardry Complete, the Complete version is going to give you more options to play, so you may as well go with that. But it's a nice middle ground. If you're looking for a retro clone that duplicates the original white box without going too rules light, say continual light version, I think it's one of the more viable options that are out there. I would actually personally recommend it over the current iterations of Swords and Wizardry white box version, much as I love the author's work on those otherwise. Charlie Mason sets out to make a much easier to understand version of those rules that allows even relative beginners to easily pick it up, as well as incorporating some things regarding dungeon design and the like that go beyond the original source. And I have to say, mission accomplished. I actually could see a current player of the Swords and Wizardry white box picking this up simply because it's easier to reference, as I'd said before with my own experiences. It is pleasing visually with tight editing and concise, informative writing, and you really can't ask for much more than that at that price. And on that note, I'm going to call it here. Links to get it will be in the description below as always from a variety of sources, pretty much Amazon, RPG Now, that sort of thing. This has been the RPG Crawler with Shelf of Many Things, White Box Fantasy Medieval Adventure Game. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you've got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content, both tabletop and computer. If you're feeling particularly generous, please check out my Patreon at patreon.com/rpgcrawler, which goes towards supporting the channel and reviews like this. Until next time, take care and goodbye.